Okay, so this morning I'm going to listen to the Second Violin Sonata by Alfred Schnittke, and I believe this is from 1968. It's from around the time of his first symphony, so this is really the beginnings of his polystylism forming. And I think I first heard about this piece in some sort of documentary about Schnittke. It featured some footage of people playing this piece, and then years later I heard it live. Let me see if I can find that concert. Yeah, so this was the context that I heard it in. This is a duo from Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Mia Detweiler and Ted Powell, duo Chromatica. They had this concert, which was two large-scale pieces. It was a piece by Ermir Bayo, his Opus 6, and I think the second half, or maybe it was the first half, was Alfred Schnittke's second sonata, which is subtitled Quasi Una Sonata. As you can see by the Cyrillic here, Alfred Schnittke is a Russian composer. This is a Russian score, and this piece predominantly features this first G minor chord in the piano. There's a climactic moment in the piece where that G minor chord is repeated many, many times. But there's also clustery things like this. So he's really contrasting strongly tonal materials or ideas, and then polytonal ideas, and then noise elements almost, or atonal ideas. Schnittke's piano writing is not particularly idiomatic. I had one experience where I tried to spend a whole semester learning his second piano sonata, and it was just brutal under the fingers. It was so difficult to play, and not in a good way. It was not a fun kind of challenge. But he's a string player, and his violin writing is quite good, I think, and very idiomatic. So, yeah. And just for fun, because there is a recording by Duo Chromatica, that'll be the one I listen to. And just to avoid any confusion, the link to this recording is in the video description. If you want to listen along, just pause it here. Okay, yeah, that was a really fun listen, and yeah, there was a lot of interesting uses of silence and call and response and juxtaposing different ideas. And I forgot how close to the end that repeated G minor chord section is. It's right at the end, so it's almost affirming this tonality that never really comes to be. And reading up on this sonata a little bit, I'm just, first thing that comes up Googling it. This is his first polystylistic piece, and it is definitely about sonata form. Big clue is that subtitle, Quasi Una Sonata, almost a sonata. And I think here Schnittke is really thinking about sonata form and how it doesn't really work. It doesn't really mesh with atonality. So he had been writing a lot of atonal music for years, and then decided to write something in sonata form, and this was the result. So it's kind of interesting to think about how his idea of polystylism actually came out of like formal ideas. It's not just about aesthetics or style. It's like a formal impossibility kind of thing. Really fun violin writing. Really fun like effects. For example, the big piano cadenza here. If you can get your hands on the score, I recommend it. There's a lot of interesting uses of like bar lines and meter or lack thereof. And this performance was pretty good, but in my opinion, there was a lot of um, pauses that sort of just happened because the call and response is so hard to coordinate and has to be so tight. So some sections were taken a little bit slower than indicated. Schnittke doesn't give very precise metronome markings. He usually just says like allegretto or largo or so it's difficult to say how fast certain sections should be, but I think there was definitely moments where what I was seeing in the score didn't quite match how it was being performed. I think that Schnittke's early style in polystylism is very different from what it eventually becomes later in his career. I think it's around his piano quintet that he starts to become more like spiritual. His pieces become a little bit more personal and less formalistic, you could say. Whereas this, he is definitely trying to do a very specific thing with form, and um, it is a very cheeky subtitle because often sonatas have the subtitle like quasi una fantasia, but this is quasi una sonata, and it's yeah, it's very charming and dramatic and funny, and the dynamics and choice of notation and articulation, it's all very intense and leaves a very big impression on the viewer looking at the score. So, and I think this is a good introduction to uh, the idea of a violin sonata and the cultural implications of that. Next, we're going to look at some violin sonatas by Charles Ives and um, think a little bit, maybe, or discuss a little bit how that's really the root of this genre. That's where the violin sonata is really where this type of ensemble gets its roots and cultural significance, you could say. So, yeah, that was it for Schnittke's Violin Sonata No.2.